Balaji Subramanian, Vice President Research at IIFL Securities, joining us for more on this. Mr. Subramanian, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Now, is this going to be enough of a relief for Vodafone? It's yet another lifeline. The question is it going to be enough to tide over this company?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show. My sense is that it postpones the problem for the company. It just kicks the problem further down the road. Because if you look at the conversion that is going to happen, firstly, it's only spectrum dues. And that too, from an overall government debt perspective, about 17-18% of the government debt is what is going to get converted into equity. That means, yes, in the absence of this relief, Vodafone Idea would have had to cough up something like 29,000 crores on spectrum plus AGR in FY26. And from FY27 onwards, it would have been much higher at around 43,000 crores per annum. Now, with this relief, these payouts will come down. So for FY26, they will have to pay around 18,500 crores. For FY27, about 23,500 crores. And in FY28, that would be around 33,000 crores. So while there is a substantial relief of around 40,000 crores over the next 36 months, the catch here is that the numbers which I mentioned just now, post-relief, they are also quite high. And they are significantly higher than what the underlying FCF generation of the company will be. Of course, there could be a debt raise of 25,000 crores now that the cash flow position is significantly better. The prospects of the company succeeding in raising debt funds, those also go up. But even with that, my sense is that probably around 18 to 24 months down the line, there could be still a cash flow crunch. And, I wouldn't be surprised if the government, if the company approaches the government to convert more of the dues into equity.
Mr. Subramanian, good morning. The question is, if they do convert more, then effectively they will become majority owners of Vodafone Idea. I'm not sure if the government wants to add another PSU in this manner. But what I'm asking is the fundamentals, as you're pointing out, have not changed. They're losing market capitalization, not market capitalization, they're losing market share. So what is your assumption in terms of the fundamentals? If they do manage to add more in the way of 5G spectrum or capacity, does that at all change things? Or is the base case scenario now of a dwindling enterprise?
So, the way I look at it is that as far as Vodafone's 4G and, 5G networks are concerned, they have a long way to go before, they catch up with their peers. So I think the first milestone for the company would be to stem the subscriber loss that they have been witnessing, for the last 5-6 years. So once that comes in, it also boils down to the success ratio in converting their existing 2G users into 4G. Because one of the key challenges for this company has been that since their 4G footprint has been significantly lower in terms of population coverage, their existing 2G users, when they want to upgrade, they end up moving out to one of their competitors. So that is something which the company will have to work upon, and for that they will have to quickly roll out the 4G network, especially on the coverage side. Once that happens, we will see that their revenue starts going up. And the good thing about this industry is that it's a high fixed cost business. So when the revenue starts going up, the incremental margin on those revenues would be around 60-65%. So my sense is that from the cash EBITDA of around 10,000 crores annualized that they are doing today, in the next 2 to 3 years, that can probably move up to 15-16,000 crores. So that's a decent increase from where they are today. But as I said, their payments to the government are much higher.
Got it. Balaji, good morning. Neeraj here. Is this move, which you call a band-aid, more positive for the likes of Indus Towers, one? So if you have a thought there. And part two of my question, independent of all that's happening in Vodafone, are the better bets still a Bharti Airtel or a Bharti Hexacom? Because, I mean, the last 2-3 years have shown in aviation, in telecom, etc., betting on the number two or the ailing horse hasn't quite paid off from our investing parlance as it has been to bet on the leader.
Good morning. To answer your question, Indus is probably the best way to play this recovery story of Vodafone Idea, because one, this development which was announced over the weekend relieves Vodafone Idea's cash flow issues to a certain extent. That is number one. And as I was mentioning earlier, the prospects of successful completion of debt raise also go up. So all these would mean that at least, Vodafone Idea is a pretty sizable customer of Indus. Almost 30% of Indus's revenue comes from Vodafone Idea. So to that extent, the signal that the government has sent out is that they would stand by Vodafone Idea, and they want to have this 3+1 market structure. So that is clearly positive for Indus. So the incremental rollout as Vodafone deploys or goes on with its capex program would be clearly positive for Indus. So I have a positive recommendation of Indus. And if one has to play the tariff repair story at the industry level, I would still think that Airtel and Hexacom are better bets than Vodafone Idea, because, as I said, while Vodafone Idea is likely to survive thanks to government support and considering the probability of more and more dues getting converted into equity, the problem is that a lot of these gains, would also be diluted for an existing shareholder, because in the limiting case where when the entire government dues are converted into equity, the government could potentially end up with 80% stake in Vodafone Idea, which means a massive dilution from where we are today. So I would think that even though there are no going concern risks for Vodafone Idea, from an equity shareholder standpoint, there can be substantial dilution further down the line.
Balaji, quick last answer. You've kind of answered it in the last statements that you were making, but for existing investors and prospective investors, because perhaps a lot of people will look at these headlines and will say it's a great idea to get in right now. Would you voice a note of caution and say perhaps it's better to play this story through Indus, as you've pointed out, or even move to Bharti and Bharti Hexacom? And existing investors, would they be better off moving out?
See, while I wouldn't, it is very difficult to catch the top or bottom of a stock. While the stock can, pop up on a temporary basis, I think from a fundamental standpoint, Vodafone Idea still remains a tricky bet, considering the, significant dilution that can potentially happen over the years. So I'm not saying that the dilution will happen in the very next year, but over a period of time, my sense is that steady dilution will keep happening.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking with us, Balaji Subramanian there. It's a tricky bet, he says. And, if you saw one equity infusion or government coming in with a lifeline and said, okay, now this company is going to be stable, that's a different question. But even if you see a bit of a bump up today because of this news, it's difficult to say how Vodafone will really survive.